For the past year, I deluded myself into thinking that I was a super productive person. I tricked myself into thinking that I could achieve this monk-like focus and get shit done. But about a month or so ago, I started noticing the progress that others were making in terms of their work output, and I started to realize that I wasn't really doing much in comparison. And I don't mean necessarily just for my career transition either, but just to see the amount of work that someone is able to accomplish within a week or a month's time is baffling. And while I'm a firm believer that I don't think that I should be making comparison or I should be comparing myself with others, I think that's really only valid for results-oriented comparison. So for instance, if someone is making 50K a month, and I'm not making anywhere near that, I shouldn't be comparing myself to them, right? That's just a losing battle. That just isn't a good thing to do. It's not healthy. But I think where comparison can be useful is for process-oriented comparison. So if someone is in a similar boat to me, and they're doing a career transition, they're juggling a full-time job, and if they're able to triple or quadruple my work output, clearly I'm not doing something right, because we both have the same amount of time during the day, the same number of hours. And so if I'm only able to accomplish, let's say, a third of the work output that they're able to accomplish, and they're in a similar boat to me, then I'm clearly not doing something right. The reason I felt like I was able to trick myself into thinking that I was productive is I didn't get distracted by these activities that took up large dedicated amounts of time. So I rarely watch TV, I rarely play video games, I rarely scroll through social media. And so because I wasn't engaging in activities, distracted activities that take up a large dedicated amount of time, I considered myself to be a very productive and focused person. But what I've come to find is that it's not the large things that keep me from being productive. It's the small things. It's like the tiny details. So for instance, picking up my phone during any idle time that I had. So if I'm waiting in line, I'm pulling out my phone. Or if I'm sitting on the toilet, I'm pulling out my phone, right? And this happens multiple times a day. I'm checking my email. And yeah, like it takes what? 20 seconds, 30 seconds to check email, but I'm doing that 20 to 30 times a day. So it really adds up. I'm checking my YouTube comments and notifications. Again, doesn't take that long, but I do that 20 times a day. I check Discord multiple times a day. I check Slack multiple times a day. I do a few swipes on Hinge a few times a day. And so all of these things are so small, right? Like each of these discrete actions, it takes almost no time to do. But the problem is that they compound on each other. And so when I do these small tasks, seemingly insignificant tasks, and when I repeat them time and time again throughout my day, it really is mind-boggling how much fucking time I waste each day. And so I had to become self-aware of the fact that I was even engaging in this distracted behavior, because a lot of people will preach that, you should do a time audit to figure out where you allocate your time during the day. And so if you're not familiar with this, this is basically blocking out every 30 minutes of your day and then figuring out what you're actually doing during that block of time. And so for instance, though, if I'm working on designing a web page, and let's say I'm doing that for 30 minutes, right? But during that 30 minutes, let's say I check my phone and I look at my email. Well, again, that takes 20 to 30 seconds to do, right? But I do that maybe 3 or 4 times during the span of that 30 minutes. Well, because each time I checked email, it took such a minuscule amount of time, I'm probably just going to lie to myself and say that I did 30 minutes of design work. And so that's where time audits can really fail, is because time audits are really good for evaluating when you have large dedicated amount of distracted time, like if you're watching a Netflix show and you don't need to be, but it doesn't really account for when you have those tiny little tasks, those tiny little distracted actions that I take that, again, don't seem like much at first, but when they compound on each other, equate to an enormous amount of time wasted during the day. One of the hardest things to do is to realize how distracted I was, because if I didn't have any self-awareness, then I wouldn't really even know that I was being distracted. And so one of the ways that I became self-aware is I just started watching productivity videos on YouTube. So some people that I've looked to for inspiration were Sam Ovens, Ali Abdaal, and Hamza Ahmed. And so they had some really good videos on productivity. And so I started watching some of those things, and I started to kind of compile a list of what I thought would be really useful tactics for me to try to implement. And so basically what I've done is I've created 5 steps that have allowed me to become insanely focused. I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, when I started doing these 5 steps, which I started doing 2 weeks ago, it's night and day how different my levels of productivity have been. And this seems like an exaggeration, but I am not shitting you. Like, if you do these 5 steps, it is mind-boggling how productive you will become, because I was able to become just insanely more productive by using these 5 steps. And so each of these steps has several sort of sub-steps a part of it, but I can assure you that if you engage in all of these steps, then you will be doing a lot more productive and focused work. It's really helped me out, and so I hope that it helps you out as well. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the 5 steps in more detail. So step 1 is to make your phone as boring as possible. And there's 7 actions to take with this. And so the first thing that I did is I changed my background to black. So a lot of the stock wallpapers on phones are very visually appealing. And so anything that is visually appealing, I want to get rid of, because if it's visually appealing, then I'm going to be more likely to go on autopilot and just open up my phone and start using it. But if I make it boring as hell, then I have very little inclination to do it. And so my home wallpaper is also black as well. So the next thing that I do is I remove all unnecessary apps. So I went through my settings and I looked through my apps, and anything that I don't need to have, I got rid of it. And I tried to get rid of as much social media as possible, but I still do have things like YouTube and Instagram. The reason I have Instagram, truthfully, I wanted to get rid of that, but I often will schedule posts using Buffer, and for whatever reason, Buffer doesn't like to post things to Instagram, so I have to have the app to verify it. It's a whole thing. But anyway, I try to limit the amount of apps that I have on here that are constantly pinging me notifications. So the other thing that I do is for apps that are historically distracting, like YouTube, I have that here, I remove it from my home screen or anywhere on my home screens that I have. So the only thing that I have on my home screen are like utility apps. So none of these apps are really distracting, right? I mean, I would argue that the most distracting thing I have is Google Maps, and that's just because I like to see all the different restaurants that are in my area, because I just like to eat a lot. But other than that, it's just all like utility apps that are not distracting or enticing in the least. And so that's the only thing that I have on my homepage. And then the other thing that I do is occasionally hiding the apps from my homepage. The distracting apps like YouTube, like Instagram, aren't enough to keep me away. And so I need a way to have a fail-safe in case I do go into one of those apps. So the thing that I use is actually an app blocker called, it's called ScreenZen, which is this app right here. And so when I go to that, I can actually, I don't know if you'll be able to see this very well, but I can basically select apps that I want this thing to block. And so when it does that, or when I select the certain apps to block, if I go to, like I'm gonna go to YouTube here, and so when you look, you see that the app is grayed out. So that's my first kind of reminder that, hey, like I probably shouldn't be using this app unless I actually need to be using it. And so let's say I go a step further and I tap on it. So if I do that, it'll ask me, is this important? And so that is my second reminder to, hey, if I don't have intention behind opening this app, then I don't need to be using this. And so if I want to actually use YouTube, I have to hit this unlock button. And even after pressing that, it takes 5 seconds for it to proceed to the app that I want to open. And this has been major because there's so many times that I just pull out my phone for no fucking reason. Like, again, standing in line. Sometimes if I'm just in between tasks waiting for something to cook in the microwave, I'll pull out my phone for no reason and just open YouTube and scroll. I might not even watch a video, but this prevents me from doing that. And so again, a lot of these actions are small, but they compound on each other. The other thing that I do is I disable the iPhone animations for leaving windows. So when you leave a window, you normally have like, I don't know how to explain this, but it has sort of this pretty little animation of the window flying away. But I basically, if you go into your accessibility settings and you go to a section called, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, called motion, you can reduce the motion. And so if you scroll, if you get rid of this, all it does is it fades to the home page. And again, it just makes it more unappealing, right? Because all those flashy animations that phones have when you're navigating between windows and different apps, it looks pretty. It makes it more enticing to use. So again, if I make this phone as boring as possible to use, I'm going to be less likely to use it. So I enabled that reduce motion. And then there's one other thing called prefer crossfade transition. I don't know what that does, but the little subtitle says it reduces the motion for user interfaces, which is exactly what I want. I want this thing to be boring, old school. All right, so that's the second thing I did. The other thing is I disabled the rise to wake feature on an iPhone. I assume that Android phones have this as well, but I am using an iPhone. So typically when you pick up your iPhone, and you flip it around, usually the screen would appear. And so this was a really distracting thing, right? Like occasionally I would be doing work and I would just kind of pick up my phone and then the screen would pop up and something would appear. And even if I wasn't intentionally planning on doing something, there'd be just these little, just like dopamine hits every time I pick up my phone and I see that nice wallpaper, I see a notification. So now I've disabled that. And then the other thing that I've done is I've disabled tap to wake. So I can tap my phone all I want. That screen's not coming on. And so I'm basically creating obstacles to using this device. I'm making it harder to use this device, less appealing. And so now if I actually want to access my phone, I have to go to the effort of hitting the power button. And so that might not seem like much, but again, every little step that I take is making this phone more undesirable to use, more unappealing to use. And that is the whole premise of, or that is the whole way that I'm able to become less distracted. All right, the other thing that I do is I disable all non-critical phone notifications. So I think really the only notifications that I get are things like messages, calls, but other than that, anything social media related, anything pertaining to YouTube, Instagram, anything like that, it's disabled. And so if I do get a notification that pops up on my home screen menu, I'll swipe over and I'll turn off that notification. So I only want the absolute critical information appearing on my phone. And geez, I'm not used to talking this continuously. I'm used to doing multiple takes, so doing a big take like this is a little tough. All right, the last thing that I do is my phone is always on silent mode. So that little clicker here, I just put that, this phone is always on silent mode. And so that way, if someone does send me a message or if I get a work related email, this thing is not gonna just ding at me all day. And so while I'm still technically getting notifications because it vibrates, it's a lot less distracting than if this thing were to send me that ping sound or start ringing. And so that has been really helpful when it comes to just not checking my phone every time I hear it go off, because now it never goes off. Now it just kind of vibrates, and a lot of times I don't even notice when that happens. Usually nothing is so urgent that I need to have it ring, right? And typically I'll check my phone once I'm done with a particular task anyway. So typically if someone did call me and they left a message and it is somewhat urgent, I would get back to them in an hour. Yeah, so those are pretty much the main things that I've done to make my phone as boring as possible. And so that is the first step to increasing the amount of productivity that I was able to have. Okay, the second step is to eliminate all distractions on your computer. So for me, the biggest distraction that I had on the computer by far is YouTube. So a lot of times I will listen to background music when I do work. So I'll open up YouTube and I'll just usually load up like a deep house set and listen to that in the background. But inevitably, what will happen is I will open up YouTube and all these alluring thumbnails are just like, hey, watch me, watch me, watch me. And lo and behold, I'm going to click on one. And the next thing I know, I'm down a YouTube rabbit hole. So one thing that really helped is there is this YouTube distraction blocker. I don't remember the exact name for it, but it'll be on the screen so you can see what it is. And this thing is really freaking cool because what it does is when you install it, it's a Chrome extension. And when you install it, it gets rid of the news feed on your YouTube. Not only that, but for me being a YouTuber, it gets rid of the notification bell. So I don't even see when someone leaves a notification. It gets rid of all the comments. So when I go to a video, let's be real, what do we all do when we watch a YouTube video? We go right to the comments and start seeing what other people say about the video, and we're not even focusing on the video that we're intending to watch, right? So this extension will block all of the comments, or it doesn't block them, it just hides them, like you can't see them at all. It also hides the up next feature. So not the up next, but the sidebar. So all the videos you see on the sidebar of YouTube, it will hide those. It gets rid of those. And then it also disables autoplay. So at the end of the video, you know how oftentimes there'll be a little countdown timer and then it'll start loading up the next video. Well, if you have this extension installed, it will disable that. And so when a video ends, it just sort of ends and there's nothing after it. So you actually have to go through the effort of searching out your next video. And so for this has been helpful for me because now anytime I go to YouTube and I see that there's no news feed or there's no video feed, I now realize that, okay, well, if I'm going to YouTube, it's because I want to look at a specific video. Either I'm loading up that deep house set or I'm wanting to learn about something. And so it just makes all of my YouTube browsing much more intentional. The other thing that I do is I download another Chrome extension called a newsfeed eradicator. I think that's what it's actually called, but again, it'll be on the screen if it's actually called something different. And what this does is exactly how it sounds. So it will block the newsfeed from Facebook. Not that I really use Facebook that much. It blocks the newsfeed from Instagram, lots of different social media platforms. But it'll block the ones that I use predominantly, which would have been TikTok and Instagram, since those are typically what I post to. So when you go to those websites, it'll just essentially be just a blank screen and with no newsfeed. So it makes it far less distracting. So if I'm uploading a video to one of those platforms, I'm not getting distracted by a myriad of, alluring videos. The other thing that I do, and this is sort of a small detail, but again, it's these compounding details that all add on each other, is I use Chrome as my browser. And so anytime I would open Chrome, there'd be like these 8 tabs or so, or 8 sort of shortcuts on every time I open a new tab. And those are distracting because I would see, even if I opened up a browser with the intent to, let's say, open up my web design software, and I saw that YouTube was there, pinged as that little icon on the Chrome webpage, I would be very tempted to go to it. And so what I did is I deleted every single one of those quick icons. And so that has been immensely helpful. So now every time I open up a new tab on Google Chrome, it is just this blank canvas, and I can either search something on Google or go to whatever website I was planning on going to. The last thing that I did on my computer is I got rid, kind of similarly to what I did on my phone, I got rid of every application that distracted me from the toolbar. So like on my toolbar, the main things that distracted me were Mail, Discord, and Slack. And so what did I do? I made sure that those were not running in the background. So I quit all of those, and then I deleted them, not from my computer, but I deleted them from my toolbar at the bottom. And if you have a Mac, you'd basically get rid of it from the dock. And so this is really helpful because I now have to go through some extra steps if I want to go to my Mail application, or if I want to check my Discord. I have to go through a couple extra steps. And you may not think that really is a big deal, but I have found for me that just those extra steps of having to do like 2 extra clicks and type part of a word in the search to get to my mail application, for instance, just those 2 kind of extra steps that I have to do is enough to keep me from accessing that application. And not only that, but it's sort of an out of sight, out of mind. I found that a lot of the reason that I went to the Mail application or Discord or Slack is because they were present, they were visible on the toolbar, right? But because they're not there anymore, I don't even really think about them, and so I don't go to them as much. And so those were the sort of actions that I took to fulfill step number 2, which was eliminating distractions from my computer. The third step is I set rules for when I'm able to check my email and my social media. So as I talked about kind of near the beginning of this video, the big thing that I was doing is I was checking my email, which doesn't take very long, 20 to 30 seconds, but I was doing it like 20 to 30 times a day. And so the third thing that I did is I set strict rules for when I can check these things. And so the way that I have it set up now is for Discord and email, I can check those on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, and I can do it once during those days, right? So usually it's at night, and it's after I have to do my most important work. So the reason I have them 3 times a week is because those are platforms where people are typically messaging me. Well, obviously email, someone's messaging me, but Discord people are messaging me as well. And so I want to check those a little more frequently. So I have those at 3 times a week. Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday is when I check those. But again, it's just once during each of those days that I will check that. And when I check that, I'm intentional that I'm not just looking at the message that was sent to me, right? Because that's often what would happen is I would check my Discord and I would see that someone messaged me or tagged me in a comment, but I wouldn't do anything about it. I would wait for some other time to message them. Either I was like in a rush or whatever the case may be. So now I'm very intentional that when I do check my Discord on any of those 3 allotted times during the week, I am not only seeing if I am tagged in a comment, I'm replying to that comment if it needs one. If someone messaged me, I'm going to reply to that email. And so that keeps things much more intentional. Now for YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, I check those once a week on Sundays. And the reason I check those once a week is those aren't as critical, right? Like no one is messaging me on YouTube. No one is messaging me. Well, people rarely message me on Instagram, and TikTok I think has a messaging feature, but I've never actually seen it being used. So because those aren't situations where people are directly trying to get a hold of me, I limit that to 1 time a week on Sunday. And again, I pick 1 time on Sunday to check those things. And then when I do, like for instance, for YouTube, if there are some comments, I will reply to those comments within whatever time block that I set aside to check those YouTube comments. And same thing for Instagram and TikTok. If there's comments on there, well, to be honest, I don't usually reply to a lot of the comments on there, not because I'm trying to be rude or something, but I don't really use those platforms as much as I do on YouTube. So anyway, that's what I do there. So Discord and email, anything where someone is messaging me or is trying to get directly a hold of me, I will check that 3 times a week. And then anything where someone is just sort of like probably leaving a comment or liking something that I post, that is once a week on Sundays. And so I think even if you're not like a YouTube creator, I think still having these rules in place is really beneficial, because if you're just posting, random pictures on TikTok or whatever, or not TikTok, Instagram, then why are you checking it afterwards? It's typically to see how many likes you get, to see what comments people left. And all that is just little dopamine hits. That's all they are, right? And it feels good, right? It feels good when someone leaves a comment when you posted a picture of your food. And it feels good, because I used to do that a lot. I post pictures of my food and people are like, oh my God, that looks great. It feels good for about 30 seconds and then that's it. It goes away. So even if you aren't creating a lot of content in the capacity of making YouTube videos, it's still, I think, essential to limit the amount of time you are on those kinds of apps and only check them once or twice a week. Limit your email to 3 times a week. And I think that will really, I just know it'll make you be more productive in the long term. So those are what I do. So that's step number 3. So setting rules for checking email and social media. Number 4 is making goals and an ideal calendar schedule. So before, I was actually pretty good about making weekly goals, but I wasn't really good about panning out and making goals for further out. Like, what are my monthly goals? What are my quarterly goals? What's my annual goal? I wasn't really good at making goals for that. And really, I've found that it's important to do that, because to me, I can create a pretty lofty quarterly goal. And then from there, I can sort of scale down to, okay, well, if my quarterly goal is this, then I need my monthly goal to be this, and then I need my weekly goal to be that. So I can sort of just like backtrack in terms of building out the specific goals that I have. And so the main thing with this is don't worry about making it fancy, right? I would always want to figure out, what's the best productivity app? What's the best goal workbook that I can get? Fuck all that. Like, I used to be really into that. Now I just have this water-stained piece of paper that I wrote down my goals on. So I wrote down my quarterly goals for July to September here. I wrote down my August goals here. And I wrote down, this was from the first week of August, but I wrote down weekly goals there. And so that's all I did. That's all you need. Now, I do post weekly goals on my Discord channel as well, because I think that posting weekly goals on a community platform is sometimes more beneficial, because there's an accountability component. So when I post my weekly goals and other people can see those weekly goals, I feel more pressure to accomplish those goals. And so that can be also an added thing too for making those goals. But as far as the actual goal setting component, I try to make them, I'm sure a lot of you have heard like the SMART acronym for setting goals, making them specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-based, right? So the main thing that I do is I just make sure that it's actionable, and that's it. Is it something that I can take action on for my weekly goals? So like for this week of August, I don't know if this is going to be mirrored, so you might not be able to read this. So I have to make 8 site audits. I have to This was like an old business that I had and I needed to cancel my credit card. Doing a weekly YouTube video, following up with clients, submitting my Webflow project, doing a rough wireframe for my portfolio. So those are all something that I can take action on. Something that is not something that is actionable would be like getting 200 likes on a YouTube video. I have no control over that. Landing an interview, I have no control over that. So making sure that the weekly goals are actionable, something that you can actually do, is very, very important. So that's what I do there. Now, some of my monthly goals are not actionable, and I think it's important to have those as well, because even though I can't do anything to necessarily achieve that goal. Like for instance, like for August, my goal is to get 2,000 subscribers on YouTube. I have no control over that other than me posting weekly videos and daily short form content. Other than that, it's in God's hands. I have no control over that. So, but I think it's good to have those, because I do think that just having that in the back of your mind, there's a really interesting way that the universe just kind of works for you when you do have lofty goals like that. And so I think for monthly and quarterly goals, having a mix of both actionable and sort of like non-actionable but metric-based goals can be really, really helpful. All right, so that's the goal. So it's important to make weekly goals, because that way you know what you're going to be doing during the course of the week. The other thing that I do is I created an ideal calendar, ideal schedule. So what I did is, and I'll probably put a graphic here on what it looks like, is I created a Google Calendar. It's a separate calendar. You can actually create a new calendar. This is a tip I got from Ali Abdaal. And what I did is I blocked out all of my time during the week. I basically thought, okay, if I had an ideal week in terms of like being productive and wanting to do everything with intention, what would that week look like? And so I blocked that out. And I did that for every weekday and then even on weekends as well. And so that allowed me to sort of get an idea of, well, if I could structure my weekend or my entire week, including the weekend, in an effort to not only maximize productivity, but just to have balance as well. Because again, I'm not trying to be this, hustle culture kind of guy where I'm working my body to the bone all the time. So putting in blocks of free time as well, so that I can just unwind, hang out with friends, do whatever it is I need to do. But having also those blocks of time for when I'm working on YouTube videos, when I'm working on doing design work, that gives me just some better focus for what I need to be doing during each block of time during the day. So that has been really helpful, and that is something that can be continuously updated, but I do think that that is a cool thing to have, and I do have that on my phone as well. So my calendar, again, might not be able to see this, but I have a calendar widget, and so I have all of my tasks that I'm doing for the day on that calendar widget. All right, and so that is pretty much step 4. So making weekly goals and then making an ideal calendar schedule so that you can have an idea on when you can be working on some of the action items for your goals. Okay, step 5. This is probably a really long video. Step 5 is to always question your mind. So multiple times a week, actually pretty much every day, I have the thought to myself, or rather the feeling of, I don't feel like doing work, because I work full-time as a physical therapist during the day. And so when I get home, I don't really feel like doing work. And so I've had to learn to always challenge that and just battle through that, because by far the biggest obstacle to being productive is just almost making enemies of your mind, so to speak, because my mind is always going to want to take the easy route. It's easy to just sit back and watch YouTube, Netflix, have a beer. That sounds relaxing. It sounds enjoyable. So when I get home and I have to work on designing a website, I have to work on doing cold outreach to potential clients, that is not appealing. And so every time that I get to the point where I have to start doing that, I have a flood of thoughts saying, oh, I don't feel like it. Like, I don't have to do this. Like, maybe I can just do more tomorrow. And I've had to just say, like, fuck you. Like, I can't listen to that. And that it's really hard to do, by the way. Like, I don't really have like an easy step to be able to do to overcome that sort of mental chatter. But you have to learn to just ignore it and just do work even when you don't feel like it. Because the problem is that it snowballs. And so if one day I decide, you know what, I am going to take a night off and I'm not going to do anything, the problem is that that can snowball. And so if I, on Tuesday, decide not to do anything that night, Wednesday rolls around, I'm like, well, I don't really feel like doing anything then either. And it just snowballs from there, and it's really hard to get back into a habit once you break it. So always listen to the thoughts that your mind is telling yourself, because your mind craves comfort and it actively tries to oppose discomfort, even though it is rewarding to do afterwards. Like, anytime I work on a YouTube video, anytime I'm working on anything that is hard to start, I always feel good afterwards. But the problem is our minds are engineered for instant gratification. And because I don't get instant gratification from, doing design work or working on YouTube videos or exercising, because I don't get instant gratification from that, my mind will repulse it or oppose it anytime I go to start doing that activity. And so it becomes I think just having that awareness that your mind is engineered towards instant gratification as opposed to delayed gratification. But if you can do that, then you'll feel great, because the thing that happens most often for me is the things that cause me instant gratification, like if I watch Netflix and have a beer as opposed to working on whatever work I need to do. If I do that instead, the Netflix and a beer, it feels great in a moment, but in the moment that I'm doing it. But the interesting thing is that afterwards, I don't feel so great. At least for me, I feel like I sort of wasted my time. Now, of course, if this was blocked free time, then sure, then I should enjoy my free time as I've, blocked out on my schedule. But if this was a time that I was planned to do some deep work and I piss off and do some of this extracurricular stuff that I don't need to be doing, I will often feel bad afterwards, as opposed to if I do some of that deep work, yeah, I'm going to initially oppose it so much. I don't want to do it. Like, it took me a lot of willpower to start this YouTube video. Anytime I start a YouTube video, there's a tremendous amount of resistance to starting it. But once I'm done with it, it feels fantastic. It feels great. It's rewarding. And so that's what I constantly have to remind myself, is that yes, the task that I'm working on is hard. Yes, there's going to be a tremendous amount of resistance, but on the other side of that, I'm going to feel great. It's going to feel rewarding, and it's going to feel a feeling of accomplishment from doing hard work is a lot more rewarding than the instant gratification of, doing some sort of distracted activity. The other thing that I do to question my mind, and this kind of goes back to the eliminating distractions, is I always ask myself, what is my intention every time I pick up my phone? Because prior to implementing all these 5 steps, the thing that would inevitably happen is I would pick up my phone, probably close to 100 times a day, and I had no intention. It was just there. And so it was literally just occupying empty space during my day. And so now every time I pick up my phone, I ask myself, what is my intention? If I get to the home screen and I'm looking at If I'm looking at my different apps and I'm looking at potentially going to YouTube or Instagram, I immediately ask myself, what is my intention? And if I can't answer that with something clearly defined, like, hey, like I am going to YouTube because I need to learn how to do this particular feature in Webflow, or hey, I need to learn how to create a more engaging YouTube title, or I want to play some deep house music in the background. Like, there needs to be some intention to why I'm using an app or why I'm using my phone. And so that initially is a very difficult thing to do, to initially ask yourself that question. And so that's why a lot of those safeguards are in place, right? So that's why I have that ScreenZen app, so that it does sort of filter out like, hey, is this important? Do I actually need to be doing that activity? And then after a while, I start to just ask myself that question before I even pick up my phone. So I'll have the thought to reach and grab for my phone, and then I'll ask myself, what is my intention? And if it's just to fill empty time, I put it down and I don't use it, because there needs to be a reason that I'm using this device. Because again, it seems like such a small thing to pick up your phone. It takes no time. But when I do that repeatedly, time and time again, during the course of my day, it adds up. And it becomes a very distracting activity. So those couple things. So challenging the I don't feel like it mentality when it comes to doing tasks, because it will be rewarding on the other side of that. And then also asking, what is your intention? And this isn't just related to the phone, but when you go on your computer and you open up your web browser, asking yourself, what is your intention? What are you doing? Because sometimes you just need to shake yourself out of this autopilot behavior that we're wired to do, because things are just so fucking addictive these days. So just ask yourself those two things. And so that's step number 5, always question your mind. So those are the 5 steps. And it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but they have radically transformed how productive that I've been able to be. And you don't have to do all of these steps. I mean, you can sort of pick and choose what might work best for you. But for me, it's been important to utilize all of them, because a lot of them are kind of synergistic with each other. So to have that app blocker that I have on here, it sort of reinforces that voice in my head to ask myself, what is my intention? And then having the background of my phone being black, again, every time I pull out my phone and I see that black background, I'm like, okay, this phone looks boring as fuck. That reminds me like, oh, okay, I need to have some intention behind what I'm doing. Like, why did I just pick up my phone? What do I need to do? And if I don't need to do anything, then just set it back down and just go back to doing whatever it is that I was working on. And so I've said this before, but each of these steps is so small, but it's the small things that matter, because it's the small things that got me distracted in the first place, right? And so it would make sense that it's also the small things that get me back on track, to get me to being productive. And so again, all of these little small tasks that are actions that I take, even though each one is very tiny, they all compound on each other and they elicit this large positive effect of me being able to be a lot more productive than I was before. Now, if you're anything like me, you are going to resist a lot of these steps, because I did, because it just seemed so rigid and it seemed like it was overkill. I mean, downloading apps to block other apps, installing Chrome extensions to block YouTube and other newsfeed, like it just seemed like overkill. And so I tricked myself into thinking, oh, I don't need that. I can just use my willpower to overcome all those distractions. Well, that shit doesn't work. And so it turns out I do need those things. And those things are really kind of like training wheels to allow myself to adopt that willpower, right? So when I encounter those apps that block my YouTube feed, again, it serves as a reminder that I need to be doing things with intention. And so I have come to find that I don't really open those apps very much. anymore. And it's only been 2 weeks. And so it's really just a matter of it's only overkill in the beginning. And then once I got used to this sort of new model of productivity, it kind of seems more normal now. Not totally normal. It still seems a little, it still seems like a lot. But because I am seeing the results of this increased productivity, it makes sense to me now because I've seen the results of it. Now, to some people, this type of stringent accountability sounds like some psychopath shit. And maybe it is. I don't know. But it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, it's allowing me to be more productive than I have been in a long time. In fact, probably more productive than I've been in my entire life. And like I said before, it feels good to be productive. It feels very rewarding to accomplish a task that I've been putting off for months, to be able to just do that on one Saturday and be like, wow, I feel great now. And like, for instance, I was working on the script of this YouTube video on a Friday afternoon. And historically, I would have never done that. Historically, I never work on Fridays. I usually piss off and I watch Hulu or scroll on YouTube. And on this particular Friday, I decided to just sit down, do the work of the YouTube script, and I was able to get it done in 2 hours. And yeah, it took a tremendous amount there was a tremendous amount of resistance when I started it, but I felt amazing afterwards. And so I rewarded myself with a Manhattan, and I could still watch Hulu. So the thing is, I can still do other things that are enjoyable, mindless activities, but I'm also able to get the hard work done as well. So kind of branching off of that, this video might seem contrary to a recent video that I published about the secret to happiness. And if you haven't watched the video, I highly recommend that you watch it after this. But if you haven't seen it, the central theme of it is that the secret to happiness is having balance in life. So many on social media, it's always preached that you have to have this hustle culture mindset and work your body to the bone. Every waking minute of your life needs to be dedicated to doing hard work. And I think that's bullshit. And so watching this video right now, you might be thinking, well, this seems kind of contrary to that, but it's really not. What it is the intent of this video is to allow you to give you tools to be productive during the times that you need to be productive. My intent with this video is not to tell you that you need to do focus work all day, every day at the expense of everything else in your life. I think that's unhealthy. I think that is a terrible life to live. It will help you achieve your goals really fast, but it doesn't really make you happy either. And so really my focus with this video is to, like I said, make you more focused within the time that you have set aside to do focused, productive work. Because if you notice on my calendar, my ideal calendar that I created, there is cumulatively about 8 hours of free time that I have during the week. So that time can be used for hanging out with friends or going to see a movie or hanging out by the river, doing like a small day trip. So I have time set aside for free time. It's not like I'm occupying every single minute with doing focused and productive work. So really what this productivity system allows you to do is to make more use of the time that you set aside for being productive and doing deep work. And the side benefit of doing these steps is that I'm a lot more present and I'm a lot more engaged when I'm with my friends and I'm with family because I don't pick up my phone constantly. I'm not distracted by a lot of different things. The thing that often picking up my phone so many times, the sort of side effect of that is I had sort of this squirrel brain where my mind would just be scattered all day because I would keep getting these small little dopamine hits every time I pick up my phone. But because I don't do that now, I find that I'm very present with the people that I'm with. During my PT job, when I'm working with a client, I feel like I'm a lot more engaged with them. And so that has been another really huge side benefit of doing this productivity system. So yeah, I hope these 5 steps are as helpful to you as they have been for me because they have allowed me to unlock a level of productivity that I have not achieved before. And if you are watching this video, and especially if you've gotten this far, and you think that you are a productive and focused person, one, I would ask why you're watching this video, because again, from my own example, I thought that I was very productive and a very focused person. But if that were the case, why was I watching productivity videos? Why was I watching those videos from Sam Ovens and Ali Abdaal and all that? So if you're watching this video and you feel like you're productive and focused, you may want to ask yourself why you're even watching this video, because there probably is an inner voice in your head telling you that you're not really being productive. You're distracted as fuck. And so, and I'm not saying that to be rude. I'm just saying that from the standpoint of it may be worth trying to really critically become self-aware of what you do during the day. Again, not so much the large, discrete tasks that you do during the day, not the dedicated activities you do, but rather those tiny moments where you pick up your phone for no reason, those tiny moments where you go to YouTube and you don't even remember how you got there. Those are the things that it's important to become self-aware of, and those are the things that doing these 5 steps will help you to avoid so that you can be more productive. If you decide to follow these steps, I would love for you to leave a comment below, because I want to know how it's been working out for you. If it works even half as well for you as it has for me, then it should be pretty life-changing, and I don't throw that word around lightly. So definitely try it out and see if it makes a difference in the amount of productivity that you are able to achieve. And if you have found this video to be helpful, it would mean a lot if you hit the subscribe button. So do that. That would help me out. And then if you are interested in that video that I was talking about, the Secret to Happiness video, you can check that out here. And until next time, I will see you in the next video. Take care.